Well, hey friends, it is so good to have you join us. My name is Clay and I'm the lead pastor here at Next Level Church. And today we wrap up our series, When God Throws a Party, by looking at the Father in the story that Jesus told in Luke chapter 15. But before we go there, I want to take you all the way back to middle school. And I don't know what you were like in middle school, but in middle school, I was the poster child for awkwardness. I mean, I was shorter than most of my classmates, and then on top of that, my parents couldn't afford all of the latest fashions and all the fashion clothes. Like Adidas shoes back then were all the rage. And if you know the Adidas brand, it has these 3 stripes kind of down the side of the shoe. Well, my parents couldn't afford that. So what my mom did is she bought me the Kmart brand. They were called Tracks. And they looked kind of like Adidas shoes, except for one big difference that is noticed by all middle schoolers. They had 4 stripes. So I had those shoes, right, the knockoffs. I also wore the Kmart Izod knockoff, which kind of had, instead of an alligator, it had this weird lizard that faced the opposite direction as Izod. So when you compare all of that with someone who needed braces and a haircut that could only be described as experimental, you get this, right? So this is me in middle school. And yes, even though you can't see it, I am wearing the Kmart branded Izod shirt in this photo. And while other kids in school, they were effortlessly cool, I was more like a walking, talking cautionary tale. Then there was this other guy. His name's Steve. He was the epitome of middle school cool. At 13, he looked like he was 20. He already had facial hair. He was the captain of the baseball team. He had a jawline that could cut glass. And his hair, man, it just always seemed to fall perfectly into place, even after going to gym. Meanwhile, my hair had a mind of its own, often resembling kind of a small bird's nest by lunchtime. So one day, I decided I was going to take the summer, and I was going to up my game. I mean, if Steve could be that cool, why couldn't I be that cool? So I did what any self-respecting teenager would do. I tried to copy all of Steve's look, right? I saved up my allowance. I bought the same name brand Adidas shoes that he had. I bought the same jacket. I even had to mimic his very cool swagger. Like he had the swagger when he walked. Unfortunately, my version of swagger looked more like I kind of had a limp, right? But I tried to do it. And the crowning piece was the hair. Steve had kind of this perfect windswept look, and so I figured all I needed was the right hair product. So I raided my mom's bathroom cabinet, and I found some mousse, and the mousse said maximum hold. And man, I went to town with my hair, and I ended up with hair so stiff, you could probably use it as a helmet. And instead of looking cool, if I'm honest, it looked like I'd been electrocuted. So on that first day of school, I strutted in with my limp, convinced that I was the spitting image of Steve. But as soon as I walked into the cafeteria, I realized, man, something is off. Because instead of admiring glances, I got stares and then snickers. And I had a friend who pulled me aside and whispered, dude, did you get into a fight with a can of hairspray? Right? So I kind of went the rest of the day trying to avoid reflective services. And when I finally got home, I looked in the mirror and I just burst out laughing. I mean, I looked ridiculous. And it was a valuable lesson. Trying to be someone else never works out as planned. So while Steve, he went on to being effortlessly cool all the way through high school, I embraced my inner dork. And you know what? It wasn't so bad. I mean, I might not have had the perfect hair or the smooth moves, but I had my own kind of charm, right? This awkward, geeky, self-deprecating kind of charm. So that's kind of a glimpse into my middle school years, constantly comparing myself to others and feeling like I was always coming up just a little bit short. And I know I am not alone in this, right? We've all been there, right? Whether it was back in middle school like me or it was just last week, we have all compared ourselves to others and then felt that we were inadequate. All of us have had a time where we sought validation through achievements or through relationships or possessions, where we looked at those around us, right? It could be our friends, it could be our family, it could be coworkers. We looked at them and we thought, why can't I be more like them? And yet, despite our best efforts, we still end up feeling unworthy or rejected. Maybe you're like my middle school self and you kind of got caught up in comparing yourself to others. If you did, you know that just keeps leading to feelings of inadequacy because it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that everyone else has it all together. And social media, it doesn't help, right, guys? I mean, there's just a constant stream of what I call highlight reels. We see our friends' promotions. We see their vacations. We see their perfect family photos. All of it just makes us feel like we're falling further and further behind. Or maybe for you, it wasn't comparison. Maybe you're the one who rebelled against expectations, right? You sought your freedom by doing your own thing. Maybe you grew up with some sort of certain expectations, whether it was from your family or society or the pressure to follow a specific path, whether it was kind of a career you needed to go into or a lifestyle or a set of values. All of it just felt suffocating. And so in an attempt to break free, you went in the opposite direction, only to find out, I'm sure, that rebellion doesn't bring the satisfaction that you hoped for. Or maybe none of that was true of you. Maybe you were the person who just prided yourself on doing everything right. You follow the rules. You work hard. You strive to be perfect, thinking that somehow you're going to earn your love and acceptance. But deep down, you feel a sense of emptiness and frustration. You wonder why your best efforts, why do I still feel disconnected and unfulfilled? All of these struggles, be it comparison, be it rebellion, be it self-righteousness, these things aren't new. They're as old as humanity itself, and the stories are illustrated in the story that we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks. It's commonly called the parable of the prodigal son. It's found in Luke chapter 15. And in this story, we can all find ourselves, whether you see yourself as the younger son who rebels or seeks fulfillment in all the wrong places, or the older son who does everything right but still feels unloved and unappreciated. Wherever you're at, this parable, I think, speaks to us all. And at the center of this story is the Father. The story isn't just about a wayward son. It's a story about a loving father and his relationship with both his sons. And at the heart of it all is this central theme, and the theme is this: the Father's love is unconditional and extended to all, regardless of our actions or attitudes. The Father's love is unconditional, and it's extended to all. It goes to everyone, regardless of our actions or attitudes. This means that whether we have strayed far, like the younger son, or stayed close but harbored resentment like the older son, the Father's love remains steadfast and unwavering. His love doesn't depend on our behavior or our ability to meet certain standards. It's a gift freely given to each of us. So no matter where we find ourselves, we are always welcome back, no matter our past or present circumstances. So with the time I have left, what I want us to do, I want us to look one more time at the story, and I want to focus on the Father. And in doing so, what I want to do today is I want to reread the whole story without interruption. I want us to just hear it, just like the people in Jesus' time. Hear it without interruption. And as we read, I want you to focus on the Father in the story and his interactions with both sons. Now, this is a lot longer passage than I would read normally, so sit back, take it all in, and then we're going to talk about a few things. So Luke chapter 15, and it begins in verse 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" Man, what an incredible story. There is so much that is going on in this story, a lot of which Brad and Doug, they already dove into in the previous 2 weeks. But today, as I said, I want to turn our focus to the Father. His actions and attitudes, they are packed with meaning and insight because they show us something amazing about God's character. The way he responds to both of his sons tells us so much about who God is and how he relates to us. So as I was reading this for myself, I was kind of reflecting on this passage. There were 2 key things that the Father does that really stands out to me. And the first one is this. It's his unconditional love. The unconditional love. The story starts with the younger son, who is kind of seeking validation in all the wrong places. Maybe not like my middle school days of comparing myself to everyone around me and feeling like I could never measure up, but more like those of us who kind of found ourselves rebelling, right? Rebelling against others' expectations, or just rebelling from the home that we grew up in so that we could strike out on our own and go on our own quest for freedom. So this younger son, he demands his inheritance while his father's still alive, which, as Brad talked about, in that culture was like saying he wished his father was dead. And then he takes that money and he goes off to live a life of rebellion and self-indulgence, thinking he's going to find happiness, thinking he's going to find fulfillment, right, on his own terms. But as we see, his journey kind of leads him to brokenness and despair. He blows through the inheritance in no time and ends up destitute. He's feeding pigs and longing to eat the slop that they're eating. That's pretty bleak, right? That's a really bleak picture. I mean, this is rock bottom for him. And at the bottom, he realizes his mistakes and he decides that he's going to go back home to his father, hoping to just be treated like a hired servant. And here's where we see the father's incredible love in action. Let's go back to verse 20. "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and he was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." Despite everything the younger son has done, demanding his inheritance, leaving home, wasting all the money, it says the father is filled with compassion when he sees his son returning. Right? He doesn't wait for his son to come crawling back in shame. He runs to meet him. And in those times, a man of his status running, that was considered undignified. But the father doesn't care about appearances. He's overjoyed that his son is coming home. He embraces him. He kisses him. He doesn't even give him you look at that story, he doesn't give him a chance to finish his rehearsed apology. Then he calls for the best robe, a ring, sandals, all of it to be brought out. All of these are symbols of full restoration and honor. He orders a feast to celebrate, and the son is restored fully, not as a servant, but as a beloved child. And here is a key insight that Jesus has given us. The Father's love is not contingent on the son's behavior. The Father's love is not contingent on the son's behavior. It's not about what the son did or didn't do. right? He didn't have to grovel or beg for forgiveness. The Father's love was there from the start, unwavering and unconditional. And that stands in contrast to what most of us experience in life, because we live in a world where much of what we receive is based on our performance, whether it's grades in school or recognition at work or even how we interact in our personal relationships. It's easy to start believing that love and acceptance has to be earned. But the Father in this story, he flips the notion on its head. His love for his Son is unshakable, regardless of the Son's reckless behavior. So, that's the first thing that stood out, the Father's unconditional love. Here's the second thing, and it may not be as obvious as the first, and it certainly doesn't get as much play as God's unconditional love. But here's the second thing that I was thinking about. It's the Father's grace towards his older son. His grace towards the older son. The older son's story is just as revealing as his younger brother's. This guy seeks validation through his obedience and self-righteousness. He's the one who stayed behind. He's the one who followed the rules. He's the one that did everything by the book. And on the surface, he looks like he's the perfect son. Like, have you ever been in a situation where you did everything right? Like, you followed all of the rules, and yet you still got overlooked or you felt underappreciated? I mean, it's frustrating, right? I mean, you put in so much effort just to see others getting that recognition, getting those rewards that you feel like I deserve, right? What happens? Well, you start to feel resentful. You start thinking, well, what about me? Like, I've been here all along. I've been doing my best. It's the same sense of seeking validation and obedience and feeling like you're missing out. That's what the older son is experiencing. He's got all these feelings of resentment, all these feelings of entitlement. So when he hears the sounds of a celebration for his wayward brother's return, he's furious. Right? He refuses to join the party. He feels cheated and overlooked. He's thinking, look, I've been here all along. I've been working hard. I never got a celebration like this. Right? It's that classic feeling of it's not fair. Right? That feeling, it's not fair. And many of us, man, we can relate to that. Maybe you're the reliable one at work who never misses a deadline, yet somehow the coworker who slacks off all the time, they get the promotion. Or maybe in your family, you're the one who's always helping out, but it's your sibling who gets all of the praise and all of the credit. It's that deep sense of frustration and resentment, feeling like your efforts and sacrifices go unnoticed and unappreciated. We've all been there at some point. Feeling like the world isn't giving us the credit that we deserve. That's a really tough pill to swallow. Yet here's where we see the Father's incredible grace. Instead of getting angry, instead of dismissing the older son's feelings, the Father leaves the party and goes out to him. He meets him in his frustration and hurt. The Father doesn't scold him for his attitude. He doesn't lecture him about being ungrateful. Instead, he gently reminds him of his constant presence and love. He says, my son, you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. He's inviting his son to come join the celebration, be part of the joy and love that's being shared, because the Father's love is equally available to those who stay and those who stray. The older son, obedience, doesn't make him more loved, just as the younger son, rebellion, doesn't make him less loved. The Father's grace covers both. It's not about what they've done or haven't done. It's about the Father's unchanging love and grace for both of his children. And to be honest, the older son's story, it really hits home with me, because it reveals that even when I think I'm doing everything right, my heart can still be far away from experiencing true joy and grace. And here's something important. The older son was just as lost as his younger brother. Just as lost. He might have been physically present, but his self-righteousness blinded him to his own need for grace. He believed he was in the right simply because he followed the rules. But his heart was far from the Father's heart. His bitterness, his sense of entitlement, they show that he was missing out on the true relationship of joy that the Father offered. Jesus, through the story, is showing us that both are missing the mark. Both sons, in their own ways, are trying to control their lives and outcomes, and both of them end up lost and far from the Father's love. But here's the good news, and Jesus is pointing this out, and it's the big idea that I led with. The Father's love is unconditional and extended to all, regardless of our actions or attitudes. Both sons are lost. It's not just the rebellious one that went his own way. The older son is just as lost in his own self-effort. And it's only through the Father's extending of unconditional love that they find their way back. Now, I don't know everyone's story in the room. I don't know your story watching online. But maybe you're here today and you find your story in the rebellious younger son. Maybe you've been chasing after your own desires, seeking validation through self-indulgence, and now you're feeling the weight of that brokenness and despair. Maybe you strayed far from what you know is right, and you're wondering if there's even a way back. Let the Father's response in this story assure you His love is not contingent on your behavior. He's ready to run to you, embrace you, restore you fully. It's never too late to come home. It's never too late to come home. Or maybe you relate more to the rule-following older son, right? You've grown up in the church. Maybe you've been a Christian for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, faithfully attending services, volunteering, and doing everything by the book. And on the surface, it looks like you have it together, but deep down, there's a sense of resentment and entitlement, right? You've worked hard to follow the rules and do the right thing, yet there's a constant feeling of being overlooked or being underappreciated. And if you're there, guys, I get it. Like, I drift in and out of this myself. There are times in my own life when I'm lost and I need to be found and I need to be rescued by God. It's kind of like my keys. Just because I found them one time does not mean they will never be lost again, right? You know what I mean? It's easy to fall into a trap of thinking that our good behavior earns us a special place or greater favor. Like one minute I'm patting myself on the back for being on track, and then the next I'm fumbling around in the dark, searching for direction. And listen, guys, I'm not talking about my eternal salvation or whether I'm going to heaven. I'm just saying there are seasons when my soul feels dry, dark, and lost. And in my 35 plus years of following Jesus, I've learned just because you've had moments of clarity, moments of connection with God in the past, it doesn't mean that you're immune to feeling lost again in the future. Life has a way of throwing us off course. And before we know it, we're struggling to find our way back. And in those moments, I realize I need God's rescue just as much as anyone. Whether it's the guilt of the younger son or the pride of the older son, I find myself needing to be reminded that the Father's love and grace is unconditional. It's a humbling experience, but it's incredibly comforting to know that no matter how lost I feel, God is always ready to welcome me back with open arms. I just need to come home. And when Jesus finishes the story, He doesn't give us an ending, right? Well, what happened? Like, we don't know. And I think it's because He wants you to see yourself in the story and recognize your need for something greater. He wants you to realize that we all need something that's missing in our lives. He wants you to long for something more, to seek it out, and to hope for a place you can truly call home. And no matter how far we've strayed or whatever we've done, God's love remains constant. You might feel like the younger son. You might feel unworthy, broken, ashamed of your past actions, or like you've messed up too much to be forgiven. But God's love isn't like that. It's not conditional. God's love for you is unchanging. It doesn't waver on your mistakes or your shortcomings. His grace is always available, and He is always ready to restore you no matter where you've been or what you've done. Right? He's always ready to welcome us with open arms and restore us fully. Just come home. Or maybe you're watching today and you've been a Christian since you were a child. And maybe you feel like you've been the one who's doing everything right and still getting the short end of the stick. Or maybe you feel overlooked or you feel underappreciated. And because of that, if you're honest with yourself, you're beginning to feel resentful or like you've been working hard without recognition. So don't let those feelings of self-righteousness keep you out of the party. You need to know God values your efforts, and He also invites you to be part of His joy and celebration. And even though you have never technically left, He is inviting you to come home. Lay it down. Just come home. His grace isn't about what you've earned. It's a gift that's always available. No matter where you find yourself on your journey, whether you've strayed far or stayed close, God's love is there, waiting to bring you back into the fullness of His grace. He's waiting for you to come home. We wrap up this series and we head into a time of prayer. I want you to take a moment to really think about where you are in your journey with God. Whether you've strayed far like the younger son or stayed close but with a hardened heart like the older son, you need to come home to the Father's love. Maybe you've been chasing after things that don't satisfy, or maybe you've been trying to earn your worth through good deeds. Whatever your story is, God is calling you back. He's waiting with open arms, ready to welcome you home. This is your moment to come home. Let's all pray together. So, Heavenly Father, I come to you today with an open heart. I thank you for always being there for me, even when I wander or rely too much on myself. You are my constant source of grace and love, always ready to welcome me home. God, I admit that I've strayed from your path, and like the prodigal son, I've chased after my own desires. And like the elder brother, I've tried to earn your love through my efforts. But I realize now that your love isn't something that I can earn. It's a gift. It's already there. You have freely given it. Jesus, I am so grateful for the sacrifice that you made to bring me home. You left heaven, endured the cross, bore my sins so that I could be part of God's family. Help me to truly understand and appreciate the depth of your love and the cost of your redemption. Holy Spirit, I ask that you fill my heart with a sense of coming home today. Let me feel the Father's embrace, hear His joyful laughter, and know the peace of being in His presence. Guide me, renew me, and help me to live in the freedom of your love. Father, I come home to you. I surrender all my fears, doubts, pride, and shame. I trust in your loving care and ask you to lead me, guide me, sustain me. Thank you for welcoming me back with open arms. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Welcome home, friends. Welcome home. Well, hey, friends, thanks for joining us today. If you think today's message might be valuable to someone you know, would you mind sharing this video? Not only could it be helpful for them, but by sharing this content as well as liking and subscribing to this channel, you're helping us accomplish our mission to raise the reputation of Jesus. And along those lines, again, I know I say it each and every week, I would love for you to head over to our website, nextlevelchurch.org, click the green give button or go to /give, and choose one of those giving options that's there. We depend on your faithful support. It is your support that helps us create content and do things to raise the reputation of Jesus where we live, work, and play. Now, by way of benediction, let me read to you Luke chapter 15, verse 20, where it says, "But while he was a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." May you go in peace, knowing you're always welcome home in the arms of a loving Father who never stops seeking you. Hey guys, have a blessed week. Hope we see you back in person. I'd love to see you in person next week as we kick off a brand new series on the miracles of Jesus.